Welcome to the Learn It, Use It podcast presented by the graduate programs in Operations Management and Engineering Management in the College of Engineering at the University of Arkansas. In our programs, we stand by Learn It Today, Use It Tomorrow. The instructors for our courses are professionals with real-world experience, and you will be able to immediately apply what you've learned. Today's workforce is changing rapidly, and all fields require adapting to new environments, which means you need new credentials quickly to improve your current performance. Our graduate programs and certificates apply to all industries, so you are competitive in today's workforce. In this episode, father-son duo Dr. Rich Ham and Garrett Ham discuss the benefits and challenges of being an entrepreneur, how the operations management decisions can apply to all aspects of a startup, and what surprises arise about the business side of business.
Thanks, Karin. And in the interest of transparency, you probably noticed that Garrett and I have the same last name. In fact, we have the exact same name. So if it appears my familiarity with the guest this time's a little bit more, then that's why. It's kind of an interesting topic, and I think people surprised. But Garrett, let's start a couple of things to just kind of set the tone. So tell us a little bit about, well, first off, you started your own business, and tell us about that business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I founded with my sister, the two of us together founded Weekender Management, which is a property management company and investor service company that specializes in short-term rentals like Airbnb and VRBO, the kinds you find on those kind of platforms. We provide both on the operations side, full service management for the day-to-day operations of the actual vacation rentals. And we also provide investor services to help them evaluate properties, make decisions on good investments. So we in that space, we attempt to be a full service management company for those looking to get involved in vacation rental properties.
And how did you come up with that idea?
Well, it was kind of an accident. I've been investing in real estate for a while. When I was in the military, I had got it started in real estate in Walmart, and then when I was in the military, I would invest in properties as I moved. And a couple of years ago, I was trying to grow my portfolio here in Fayetteville or Northwest Arkansas, and I found a home in Fayetteville. And the only way the numbers would work was vacation rental. And I'd never been involved in that before, but we started doing that, and we had some success with that. And then other people who were kind of exploring those opportunities came to us and asked us for help. And that's kind of how the business started. And it kind of grew from there, word of mouth. And then as time went on, we started to, professionalize it a little bit more.
So the whole thing we're talking about this evening is those principles within operations management. And so one of the things I find interesting here, and this is becoming kind of I guess some would fancy itself the next Austin, this kind of a startup hub, and then a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation going on. But I don't know how many times, I personally work with drone startups and several of them, and you hear them talk about the kind of, at least give you the idea that it's a seat of the pants kind of thing. But because of our relationship, I hear what you're doing, and it's like not really, it starts out seat of the pants, but a lot of what you're doing is just traditional operations management in the service sector types of things. So talk a little bit about, if we're talking about HR, the human resources piece, or picking locations, you talked about tools that you use to help investors make decisions, or, the finance piece, just how do you forecast, figure the numbers out? What kind of tools do you use? I mean, it seems like it's like everybody just thinks it's like, oh, I just look at this and see if it makes sense to me, but I see you using tools to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit, when you start your own business, even if you have a lot of experience in the industry, there is some level of, flying by the seat of your pants. That Eisenhower quote about, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. A lot of that is associated with what goes on in entrepreneurship. So at least in the real estate space, because my background coming from Walmart, my training in that very much on commercial real estate in particular, but it's applicable to residential real estate as well, is the analysis you use with, from a very basic standpoint, figuring out net present values and IRRs on your the different deals. So you can look at a deal, you run the numbers using a variety of tools that are available. Most of it you can do on Excel. But, it's one of those things. You can be an expert in running the numbers, but if it's garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of the tools that we use to try to analyze the market are very technology based. So we use programs like AirDNA, which scrapes information from Airbnb and other similar channels to figure out what comp properties are running. And then price labs and various other technological tools. And then at that point, it's a lot of it's experience. You kind of figure out what are the good numbers as you're using these tools, because these, there's some aspect where it's it's a little cliche to say it's more of an art than a science, because that's a little ridiculous. But it does get to the point where you kind of figure out where the good data is from these tools. And so being able to zero in on not just the tools you're going to use, but then what aspects of it are going to be valuable to you. That's a big part, of what we do. And when you first start getting going, everything is reactive in a sense. You make these plans, everything seems high level. And then when things get into place, a lot of the tools that we use are kind of things that we find on the fly. Like, we have this problem, so you start going out and looking for, we can't be the only people who've had this problem. So we look to see, what are the property management software, other people have had the issues that we've had with having difficulties in making sure that all the guests get the information that they need. What are the issues, with scheduling cleaners? What are the issues with payroll? So we use a variety of different tools as far as like software technological tools. Analysis and things like that. It's a little, in this space, it's a little simpler just because a lot of it is very mathematical based. The CCIM, which is a big commercial real estate program, gives a lot of those kind of calculators to run numbers. But then a lot of it just becomes finding the right technological pieces to help you run the day-to-day operations.
So you start out seat in the pants, but then over time you develop the way to do it. Analytics and statistics, a lot of that's art. I mean, you figure out what that, right? And so just what you described is what you do over time. You develop the skill set, and then you figure out how to apply them appropriately. But one of the things, I guess, that people would ask when they're starting these is, how did you prepare for this? So you've got a law degree, you have a graduate degree from Yale, and I know you took an entrepreneurship course at Yale. You're a real estate broker, so you've got all these things that, I mean, or are any of those or all of those useful? Or and then if someone says, well, I don't have time to go to law school, how would you prepare for that? What are the kind of things that you would do?
Well, I think it's, we got into real estate because my background was in real estate. I don't know that I grew up with this idea that I was going to go into real estate one day. It's something I stumbled into and I loved. And I think the advice I give to people is start with something you know at least a little bit. Because what we're finding is there's kind of two aspects to a business. There's the higher level general knowledge of the business, and then the day-to-day stuff, which is often very different. And if you can at least start with some kind of general knowledge of the business itself, it makes it a lot easier as you're trying to figure out the things that you didn't anticipate being a problem. So that'd be my advice. If you have some kind of knowledge in an area, you got a passion, not to sound, to Generation Z, if you've got something that you like, and you know enough about, go with that. There'll be you'll have to learn a lot. There's a lot of stuff you won't know going in, but the more you can minimize that, I would say the better. The training, things like law school, and when I was at Yale, I wasn't an MBA, but I took about, I think, 12 to 15 hours in the School of Management over there, and everything there in the business school that they taught in the entrepreneurship class, real estate, and in law school, everything's very high level. So I come with it with this idea. I have a general understanding of how business works, how markets work. I can run the numbers. I understand real estate. Having that in the background helped me a lot as I'm trying to, as I have over the last couple of years, tried to learn things that I didn't anticipate. So, in business school, when they're talking about, entrepreneurship, all the kids at Yale are talking about, getting venture capital and seeing, raising funds and, burn rates and things like that. There's no classes really about talking about, okay, well, what do you do? There's two people in your business and you're just starting out and one of your cleaners didn't show up, or, there's a plumbing issue in the middle of the night somewhere. That's not the kind of stuff that you plan for. So having at least a basic knowledge of the business so you can focus on developing the processes to deal with the actual operational aspect of it, I think gets you more than halfway there.
So you got to describe, so it's kind of interesting because then you see if you agree with this. So what happens in a lot of startups, and I hear this from the startups, the ones I talk here, the ones that are doing, drone startups, some of the others that I've talked to and worked with on companies that are doing consulting, but they start out with this strategic idea and then they kick it off, and very quickly they're deeply involved in the tactical implementation with the goal of eventually transitioning to where they can be strategic again. So I say all that to in the life of a startup and how it happens to kind of get your take on when you do that, when you start, there's often this idea, my background, like in security and emergency response, it's like everything's about the transitions. If you do it too early, you spend too much. You do it too late, you lose everything. And so transitions and global competition, very similar. It's about the transitions. Do you effectively transition? Talk about that part. Transitioning, strategic, tactical, trying to get to strategic. How the HR pieces are difficult there, and then how do you decide what's the right time to hire a new full-time person or, set a different model?
Yeah. So I think that's been the most difficult part of running, a startup. Because as you're preparing, it's not just in business school or law school or, the information that you read. Everybody focuses on being a strategist. And it seems like a lot of what goes on in that first year is you set your strategy before you start, and then you just spend all your time being a tactician. And so it becomes very easy to lose sight of the initial strategy just because your whole life becomes putting out one fire after the other. And so you start implementing, it's very easy to start implementing tactics that are completely divorced from what was supposed to be the strategy of the company. I think, there's some aspect of military training that I think helps. And I think that officer training in particular, if you spend some time as a military officer, it does help because they do have, if it can be done well, where you're a company grade officer, you lieutenant, and they teach you how to be a tactician to some extent with an eye towards strategy. And I think that's kind of how you have to start, kind of understand, have a general strategy, and then try to implement that, try to create tactics to bring that to success, getting to the point where we can focus and come back out to strategy. That's kind of where we are now. That's what we're kind of struggling with. So we're kind of in the middle of that transition right now, and it's a little tricky because you do get used to running things. So once things are really starting to hum along and you're starting to find some success, being able to let go of some of the things that you were doing that made you successful to trust somebody else, in order to help, allow you to focus on strategy and help, bring greater success to the business. That's a tricky thing, both from a financial standpoint, having the money to hire the right people, and from a psychological standpoint, because, you begin, it's very easy to identify yourself with the business itself. So if you're not the one doing it, you worry about it's not being done right. And so that's a difficult transition to make.
So you started out with a quote earlier that matches that, and I'd say in the military, I guess the cousin to that quote would be, all plans survive until first contact with the enemy. And so it's the same kind of thing as soon as you start the tactical piece. Do you agree with that? And
yeah.
It's different. You had these great ideas and then you have to implement them, and it's different. And in the end, it's about people. And so that's kind of the segue into my next question with you. So, the people issue, you and I have talked before about the kind of a need for a model, because it's a difficult model. Pretty quickly, in your case, you scaled up and you needed full-time cleaners and full-time people, but yet you only have a part-time window in order to clean Airbnbs. Check out at 10, check in at 4, you get 6 hours. So you don't have there's not a full-time there. So, and struggling to keep people, especially the difficulties everybody has hiring people now. Talk some about that, and about some of the things, what kind of tools you did or decisions that you made that helped you get through that.
Yeah. So that is, that's the kind of thing I was talking about earlier, the kind of thing you don't really expect when you're doing the strategy thing. Some of those kind of tasks, you think, well, and just find someone to do it. And, that'll be the end of it. And it doesn't really work like that. This idea that I had, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs have in the beginning, is like, as we grow, maybe, we'll get enough money and we start thinking about headcount, and, the goal is going to be, hey, when can we bring on like a professional COO or something like that, or full-time marketing person, and you start thinking about bringing on executives. And the most difficult thing really is bringing on somebody who does a good job cleaning a house and takes pride in their work. And because it's going to be different in every business, but for our business, that's a huge linchpin. Is if a guest shows up and the house isn't clean, or it's subpar, that can kill the whole business. So a lot of our struggle has been finding people who want to do that kind of work and want to do it well. And, part of that is, and it's not just the economy, people are having a hard time finding people to do work anyway. But, paying people well enough that they'll want to come do that work and take pride in it, and try to get them, try to make them feel appreciated for the work that they're doing. Because I don't think in a lot of industries, some of what, quote unquote, menial work is not given the credit that it deserves, because in this business, for example, that what may be considered the menial work, the housekeeping, is the absolute most important thing that goes on day to day. So that's been a constant struggle for us, just to find that balance. Because when we find good people, and we have found some great people, you want to, reward them, but there's that window of what you can do, of what you can afford. So HR has been probably the most difficult piece, and not from the perspective, that whole, Ebenezer Scrooge caricature, trying to squeeze, the most work out of somebody for the least amount of pay.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't really work. You're not going to be able to pay somebody $11 an hour or whatever. I think that's the minimum wage now. And expect them to take, and then, treat them poorly and talk down to them and expect them to come in and care about how successful your business is. So, but at the same time, you can't give them all your profits or you'll go under. So there's a balance there. And that, HR, I think, as far as all the operational management tools and laws, HR has been the most difficult piece for us to try to get right. It's something that we work on constantly, because it's both a tactical and a strategic issue. And it's a learning process. Constantly try to respond to the feedback we get from our employees, while we're also keeping an eye on what's best for the company. So I wish I had better answers for that, but it's a struggle. It's a struggle.
Well, and by anybody's looking externally, if anybody would be prepared, I mean, you've got the formal education, you've got the law background, you're a leader as a military officer. So all these things, I mean, for others, they would look at that and go, oh, it's a struggle in your case. And then they're looking at their own background or their own preparation. I guess the transition or my question there is, when you look at that, because you mentioned something very interesting, the tactical and strategic implementation of this. So if we looked in like our operations management program in strategic management, we talk about the strategy and how we lay out a mission statement. This is what I do day to day, provide the best service, blah, blah. And then the vision statement, and this is where I want to be. So talk a little bit. I mean, you've really kind of laid that out, but about that struggle, because you're every day you're doing what your mission is, but then you've got this vision, which includes, how many properties under management should there be, and the rest of that. Do you struggle with trying to keep those two things in balance all the time, or is that really what the real difficulty is?
I think we do. So some of the tactical pieces are just, if we're going to get to where we want to be, like the vision for the company, as far as growth and profitability, and then the services that we can offer investors or potential investors who are people who are trying to get started in real estate and feel comfortable, help them feel comfortable in investing. Those kind of aspects will make up the vision of the company. But the other stuff, the tactical stuff, is a given. All that has to happen to get there. So, the houses have to be pristine. The guests have to have extraordinary. We can't serve our clients well if the guests don't have extraordinary experiences. So it's easy. They're very compatible. They go together easily. In our situation, at least the way that we've defined, what we want to see in the company, in the future we want to see. It's just because the tactical aspects of it are so essential to fulfilling that vision. It's very easy to get just completely swallowed up in the tactical pieces, where I wouldn't say that the strategy, I wouldn't say the vision for the company is just forgotten. It's often this feeling like, okay, we got to put that on hold a little bit. We got to pause so that we can make sure that we are taking care of the things that we need to do for the guests, to make sure they have a great experience, so that the clients feel comfortable, so that they're getting their maximum return on their investment. And that's a constant struggle, and it can go either way. You can get too caught up in tactics forever, so that if the owners of the business are in the weeds of the business all the time, the business is not going to be successful, or at least not have any kind of larger scale success, because one person or two people in our case can only do so much. And for some people, that's fine. It depends on your vision for the company. But at the same time, if you take it to the other end and you grow very fast, and your vision just takes over everything to the point that you don't really see anything other than meeting these numbers or these goals, you'll quickly find out that you've built this very unstable business on an unstable foundation. So, I mean, it's, a lot of the success that we've had, and I think it's made us more mindful of it, is a lot of the success that we've had is from, clients that we've gotten from businesses or in a similar field, competitors who grew too fast and forgot how to execute the tactics. So you can go from 1 to 100 properties in a year if that's what you want to do. But if you don't have the systems in place, if you don't know, what the building blocks are to implement that strategy, you're going to end up with, you'll hit your numbers once and then they'll fade real fast. So that's a balance, and that's a constant struggle. And I think that's probably a constant struggle with any business. No matter how successful, a lot of the case studies they do in business school, or at least in the entrepreneurial classes or the managerial accounting classes that I took at Yale, were a lot of these companies that just got a ton of, where financing wasn't an issue. They raised a ton of venture capital. They grew extraordinarily fast, and they grew so fast, so quickly, they went bankrupt. And so that's kind of something that, obviously, we're not a Silicon Valley funded company. We're a bootstrap company. But I think the principles still carry over, and that's the struggle that we have to try to balance the desire for growth, the innate desire to make our services available to as many people as possible, while not diluting the value of those services to each individual client as we grow.
Well, and so you you mentioned and kind of lay this out for me, because I've seen kind of these models you have. You talked about properties you own that you enter, and then you have subletted, and then you manage the properties for other people. So talk a little bit about the difference in those models, and then are any of the tools differently when you use different models like that? Or, I mean, how you look at those to make decisions, like location decisions and such.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So they will be different. So we've got, when we first started, we were big into what is in the industry is called rent arbitrage, where you sign a long-term lease and then you turn around and you short-term rent it. And so you can pocket the difference. We only have one property left on that. We decided to focus on the managerial side as we wanted to grow. We wanted to be more focused. We have one property that I own personally, but not the business. So we treat that as a managed property. I don't get a discount or anything. Like, the company takes the same, treats my property the same way as it treats any other client's property, and charges me the same. And when you're a startup and you're not taking any money out, that's not like I just get that money back. It's out in their business. Right. So the tools will be different there, but the tools that I use when I'm looking at personally to purchase a property, it was the same tools I use when investors come, because a lot of times we do get investors on the front end who are looking to invest. So it's a different calculus when somebody comes and says, "Hey, I'm looking to invest for short-term rental. What's your advice? Location, return?" So all of that, it's very traditional real estate analysis. And a lot of it kind of depends on what their goals are for the property, but the basic is, at the most basic level, is the net present value of the anticipated cash flows. And so we'll put together a model and analysis of what we're seeing in the market and kind of what we're seeing for long-term growth and rents. And, if the present value of the deal is worth more than the cash they'd have to put up, then based on their needed rate of return, then, we recommend moving forward on it. So all that's very, investing from that perspective for acquisition is pretty similar. Same thing with rent arbitrage. It's still discounted cash flows. It's just you don't have that big upfront investment. When it comes to people who've already have the property coming to us, the calculus is different. What we'll do. So we've learned, which should be common knowledge, but it's borne out through experience. You don't want someone coming to you and you're a client and they end up disappointed in their returns through no fault of your own. You want a happy client. So if somebody comes to us with a property, we'll analyze it for both as a short-term rental, because that's what we do, and as a long-term rental, which we don't do. And if we think that it'll be better as a long-term rental, we'll refer them out to a property management company that does that. So we'll run those kind of analyses for their properties. At that point, though, the property's already bought. So if somebody we're not going to be Captain Hindsight, like, hey, you shouldn't have bought that. We'll try to serve them, the best we can. And if it comes down to we're not going to be able to get them a return because of, if you buy $1 million home, that's going to bring you in, $20,000 in revenue a year, no matter what you do, there's nothing we're going to be able to do for you. So we try to be upfront about that. But generally the analysis, what we're doing, that's very rare in this market. At this point right now, short-term rentals are doing very well in Northwest Arkansas. So the way we analyze those is we run the comps, what we're seeing through Airbnb properties that are similar. I will go through, when we bring on a new client, I go through every similar Airbnb property manually and find the ones that are comparable and scrape the data on that so we can give them a good idea of what they can expect and their revenue. And, we see what their expenses are, and they can look at it and see, if is it worth it for them to hold on to the property or not. What we try to do, and it's something we try. So it depends on who we're talking to as well. So our fee is 20% of the accommodation fee. And we believe in most situations, just because of our knowledge of the market and the way that we set pricing, we can more than make up for our commission. So we can increase your revenue. We believe we can increase your revenue at least 20% if you hire us to cover it. But if for some reason we're seeing in the market that we're just not going to be able to do that, we let people know. So all that's a long way to answer. Our analysis is very much centered around, is hiring us a good move for the client? Because them hiring us is usually a good move for us, but if they're not happy, it's not worth it. Because we get off the top, and if they're in the hole the whole time, it's just not going to be a good experience for them, which is the last thing we want. So those are the huge differences between how you analyze a potential investment and how you analyze a property that a client already owns, or potential client already owns, wants to talk about bringing you on for your services. That was a real long-winded answer.
Yeah, but it's important because it is different to, to give an analysis and talk. So you're caught in this place. So if I look at, I look at our OM program, I look at different types of courses we have. So you talk about things that we see in strategic management and how those come together over time. You talked about, I know, and I personally, and I was transparent up front because I watch you and Stephanie do this, my daughter, and you two work it, and I see all the elements of a project management to bring one on. How do we bring it on? And then sometimes you're staging it for them, and so that's a part of the project. So you could literally lay out a Gantt chart and what it takes start to finish to bring one on. Finance, you talk about the use of net present value and the others, but here's the one a little bit that we kind of talked about, you and I, before, but it has to do with this idea of those transitions and change and how difficult that is. So, I had a great mentor that told me when I was real young, he said, whenever you make a change, so say your case, you transition to another full-time employee or somebody, he said, you say it, and then you say it again, and then you say it one, and he said, when you think that you've said it more than needed, then say it one more time. So talk a little bit about the leadership piece when you're asking. So say you're asking cleaners to do something different, wash the laundry on site or send the laundry somewhere else. What have you found to be effective tools on that to make that work?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I think I'd preface that by saying, if you're going to find a business partner, find someone who has different, strengths than you. So Stephanie typically runs that aspect of the business. So from working with her, I think that she does a very good job of kind of setting the expectation with the understanding, and this is something that we have to learn. And I think it's, coming from the military gives you a lot of benefits, but there's some things you have to unlearn as well. You do sometimes have to tell somebody multiple times what your expectations are. And I don't think most people are malicious in the sense of, I'm just not going to listen, because we've had people like that and you just have to let them go. But I think a lot of times it's just, they're not getting it. And it's not like in the military where you can be like, well, I told you to do this. So now there's, great wrath will be poured upon your head. So I think having that patience and trying to develop people, identifying people who want to do a good job. And once you do that, I think having the patience to keep at it, I think that has been effective. There's an understanding, though, if you don't meet standards at some point, you're going to, you'll have to find, some other place to work. I feel like we pay pretty well. So we're not quick to let people go at all. But at the same time, if someone's not right for the company, it's best for them. It's best for us if we just move on. So, it's a little bit of a tricky deal when you're dealing with people and being a good leader. I think leadership is both complicated and simple. If don't be a jerk, seems to be, don't be arrogant. That gets you halfway there. But if you don't know what you're doing and you're not competent, it becomes more difficult to motivate people to do things the way that they should do them. So, from where I am and what I do in the business with the numbers and the strategic planning and legal aspects of it, setting kind of like the expectations are for the overall company success. I think Stephanie and I work very well in the sense that she's very good at taking that, and obviously she's involved in the strategy. I'm just saying from my strengths and her taking the plans that we've formed together and translating that into a motivated workforce. I think having that complement it has helped us out a lot. I don't know if that really answers the question, but so I think what I'm coming down to is oftentimes being a good leader to motivate people is, if you're not quite sure how to do it in this situation, finding somebody who is. And I think when it comes to housekeeping, because I don't know anything about housekeeping other than I know if something's dirty most of the time. But Stephanie does. And so, I've got a lot of leadership experience, a lot of experience motivating people. But I don't, when it comes to this particular aspect, what I have to do is find somebody who knows about that particular aspect of the business. And Stephanie does a good job with that. And we have another cleaner. Actually one of our supervisors, both of our supervisors know it very well. And so putting them in a situation where they feel motivated to carry that out, I think is kind of how I've handled that. If I don't know what I'm doing, I find people who do, and I try to, empower them to take control of their own areas of responsibility.
Well, and so some of that you talked to, kind of moving into those areas, you've made decisions that I've watched where you're looking at whether or not it made sense to bring something in-house or contract it, and that's all about transition space, right? It's the same thing we talked about. It's that going from, startup to medium and someday probably to large, and how do you make these organizational decisions and behavior in that? So, I mean, how do you look at that about should I contract this or should I keep this in-house?
Yeah. So, well, in one sense, it's simple. It's financial. But it's a little bit more complicated than that because, 9 times out of 10, hiring a contractor is cheaper. But you got to put in. So one of the reasons that we brought our employees in-house, our cleaners in-house, is, it was cheaper to hire the contractor, but then we were having to spend money and time to go and quality control. So if we're having to spend all our time going after the cleaners, and Stephanie was doing this a lot, going after the cleaners to making sure that they cleaned, well, that's not cheaper. So a lot of the times the calculus is with that. It's going to vary by exactly, the service that you're talking about. Most people who are in vacation rentals do not have internal people. They contract it out. And if you're in an area and you have great contractors, that's probably, that may be the way to go. As you get bigger and you start to try to build a brand that's known for quality, it's helpful to have somebody who's not just doing the work for you, but part of your culture. And that's where we're trying to go. So that's a larger aspect. And in one sense, it's still financial, but it becomes a little bit more complicated in the way you run those numbers. Because, the things when you have employees, you got to pay unemployment, insurance, taxes, you got to pay, Social Security and things like that, and workers' comp. But you put all that together, and if you're able to maybe, drive your revenue a little higher because of the quality that you're delivering, or you got ambassadors, if you got great employees and you treat them well, they're going to spread, this advertisement. Then you try to reward them for that kind of thing. So you got that it's a larger calculus. I'd say as you get bigger, finding the numbers, it's not just one number versus one number. Getting to that bottom number includes a lot of different considerations. So I guess it's a long way to say, it's complicated. Everything's based on return. I mean, if you're in business, it's just the way it is. Obviously you want to be, putting aside the aspect that most people want to be good people. If you're just even if you're just a sociopath running a business, if you're shrewd, you're going to treat your people well, and you're going to make decisions based on that, because that helps drive the bottom line. So a lot of that goes into those kind of considerations. It's just, you can't make decisions in the beginning and when you're, $1 million company as you did when you're just starting out, because the different formulas and the different considerations and factors that are going into making decisions are just larger and more complex.
And that those changes making the transition. So I look now today, even some celebrities that have made a lot of money in the news, and we look at them and it sure appears like they're violating some of those principles that got them to the big place and making some really bad decisions. So this is an important part. So of the OM decisions, which one do you think is the most difficult? You've talked about location, even some applications of layout and some of those things that are going into. But of the OM decisions, which one do you think is the most difficult?
Oh, HR. Yeah, absolutely. Some of the other ones you can accommodate for, like a location, particularly in real estate, they talk about, the importance of location. But, if you find a property that's going to make, $10,000 a year, but you pay $100 for it, you can make that location work. HR though, is by far the most difficult, because as you're growing, you're in a position where you're depending on other people, to have, your company's best interest at heart, and figuring out a way to make them feel like they're part of the company and they're part of the success, what you hope will be the success story. And not just paycheck collectors is extremely difficult, and not just because it's difficult to get people to see things that way, but it's difficult to create the environment where they should, where you could reasonably expect them to. Like I was saying earlier, if you bring on a cleaner, for example, paying a minimum wage, and you have no real interaction with them, and except to scold them or whatever, they're going to care about is getting their money and getting their job done and going. So being a good leader in the sense that, the person who, maybe, is not a supervisor on the, to put it crassly, on the low end of the totem pole, feels as much a part of the business, as anybody else, and anybody up the pole, and feels like they're adequately rewarded for their contributions. That is hard. And not just because it's hard to figure out what exactly it is you need to do, but because it's so easy to get caught up in things that seem more important at the time. So HR by far the most difficult. And the more stuff I learn about other companies, I think that's probably pretty true most places.
The news would indicate.
Yeah, I think so. I think Elon Musk may be learning about that a little bit.
So there's no doubt when we see some of those that's difficult. And I look at our HR like our HR course, we talk about what should an HR manager do, which when you're a startup, you're everybody. You're CEO, COO, HR manager, all of that. But one of the steps in there about those services is training. So you and I have talked before that if, one of the things is you're looking to hire somebody as you begin to look to full-timers full-time and you bring them in-house in your culture and you go to hire them. And when you do, though, you're paying them what you can afford today, but you're trying to hire the person that you think can grow to where your vision is going to be some time from now for training. So what kind of struggle has that been to try to figure?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a pretty, big struggle. I mean, obviously at this stage, unless you're extraordinarily, well-funded through deep pocket investors, we're not going to be able to go out and find some guy who's former Fortune 100 COO or something like that. I mean, we get that. But at the same time, there are things, startups attract a certain kind of people who are willing to work for, there's a limit, but are willing to work for less in exchange for equity or things like that allows them to be really part of the company. And Stephanie and I are kind of starting to explore kind of that idea of being able to, offer equity incentives to as we grow, not just to be able to attract good people, but also to give people a sense of, ownership. That was a big thing. What some of the storied history of Walmart was how Sam Walton went out of his way to give, even cart pushers some kind of stake in the company, even if it was little. And you hear these stories about cashiers retiring as millionaires because they got in early and got the stock awards. So that is something that we're looking at, because particularly at this point, I think it should. I'm sure it's bigger. It's more difficult when you get to be a larger company, but where we are, we're in a situation where we can give people. We want partners. We may have started this thing, but we want partners who can help us succeed. And we're not just looking just for hired guns, to put it crassly. So that's something we're exploring now. That's going to require a structure change. It's very from an LLC to a corporation. But that is something we're looking at as we look to grow, to try to bring on people who want to be involved and willing to make some short-term sacrifice for hopefully a bigger reward down the road.
And so you spend all this time just doing change management. So, as we walk through these, it occurs to me, and you and I have talked a lot, but I look at the strategic course, the OM decisions in our intro course, change management, leadership, finance. You talked about things that are basically right out of our course, done day to day. And, it's like I said, I think most people are when they get there, they look at the startup and then they realize, hey, I need to learn some new tools. And I'm sure, and you were better prepared than most. I mean, you had this kind of background for this area, but what was the thing that surprised you the most, that when you started the business? And, I don't know if I'd say the most difficult thing, but it surprised you the most. You didn't necessarily anticipate it. Maybe you anticipated all of it.
No, just kind of harken back on things I've said earlier, is like how deep in the weeds and things that just, never, occupied my mind when we were starting to looking at launching this company. We had a business plan, and we considered, obviously things are always a little bit more rosy when you're planning, and we understand that, but none of the planning is like I said, what are we going to do if the house isn't clean? Or what if we're going to do after we hire a cleaner that they don't do a good job, and then, the guest is complaining, and how are we going to control that? So, this, you're starting out, and it becomes like my job title is CEO / tech support / and Stephanie, COO / janitor, / what, you do everything. And I think that was the biggest surprise. And in retrospect, it shouldn't have been, but the biggest surprise was how much time, you spent with that kind of stuff. I remember when I was in high school, I worked at a church. I was a janitor at a church, and I remember one of the pastors making a comment when we were setting up for something. And he's like, it doesn't matter how many degrees or doctorates you get, you'll always end up moving tables. And that's really not something they talk about. That kind of, I mean, it translates here too. If you're those, the business schools, those MBA students at, Yale and similar schools, I don't remember hearing a whole lot of that kind of conversation. They're like, well, it's, there's a lot of, you'll have to work late and, you'll have to make hard decisions. It's very much, there aren't conversations about you're going to get a call at 2 a.m. Because, a guest can't figure out how to use the remote control on the television, and that's an emergency. And, you got to figure that out right now. That stuff's not talked about. So I think that's the biggest surprise. How technologically, how many people, and this is something I should have known too, as we begin to rely more and more on technology to automate, I have become surprised at how many people, even in my generation and younger, have a very difficult time managing basic technology. So trying to figure out a balance there, like how do you put automation in place to help your business run smoothly without dealing with a bunch of people who are confused by things that you think are so simple, and trying to, to not be condescending and trying to be empathetic to the various backgrounds people are coming from. That kind of stuff has been very surprising. And I think some of has required adjustments in my expectations for how operations work. You expect problems in this general sense, but this kind of piddly stuff that we have to deal with a lot of the time, it's not really something you plan for. And how much time it eats up has been unexpected. Yeah.
All right. Well, Garrett, thank you for, you and I, spend quite a bit of time talking about these kind of things, but thank you for the time that you gave here. We will now, as we come up on time, Karin, I'll hand it back to you. If there's any questions there, then certainly you could pass them, and then you can do the wrap up.
Great. Thanks, Rich. So everyone, just want to point out that we've got a QR code here. If you want a quick scan of your computer screen or your phone, however you're joining us tonight, to learn about all of our professional graduate programs in the Department of Industrial Engineering. We have 2 master's degrees, one in operations management, one in engineering management. We also have graduate certificates, which are 4 courses, and we also have our brand new micro certificates out this year that are 2 courses. So if you want to scan that QR code, it'll take you to our programs page where you can browse and take a look to see what programs we have to offer. So I want to thank Rich and Garrett, father and son duo tonight. I do want to make an announcement. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and type those in the chat box right now. We'll take some questions here at the very end. So please reach out. But our next podcast is on December 13th. We're going to have our episode 3 of our new podcast here for hired traits and trained skills. That's going to be with 2 of our operations management instructors, Mr. Jim Bergen and Travis McNeil. So stay tuned and check your email for links to register for that. If you need any information about our flexible degree options, we've got our email there listed on the screen, or just check us out online, operations-management or engineering-management.uark.edu. And as listed, stated on the registration page, that anyone who did register for this episode will receive a link to the recording. So that will be coming out tomorrow. So check your email for that as well. If no one has any questions, Rich, Garrett, would you like to have any final thoughts here?
Well, I'll just say one thing, and this would be different than I do with most guests, but I will go ahead and volunteer Garrett up, that if people had a question, and certainly about how the degree program, Garrett's also an instructor. It teaches our B-Law course, which has a lot of the principles you talked about in the HR piece, but that, since I'm your dad, I'm sure if I asked you, if someone's asked a question, you would help them.
Absolutely.
Say something.
Absolutely.
So it'd be a little bit different than most guests. But I would say that as we see this move more and more, we've had several of our students that get to the comp exam and say, well, I was trying to learn some skills because I'm going to start a business, or I took those skills and now I'm starting a business because I realized that I could use the skills out of the degree program. Then I think there's a place, there's this kind of tactical implementation that Garrett was talking about, a lot of which we have, and instructors that have real world experience there. So thank you very much again, son, for doing it. I think it's helpful to folks, and I would anticipate we'll see more and more of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Rocky Gay, he's one of our engineering management professors, so he joined us this evening. Thanks, Rocky. Rich and Garrett, his question is, how do you find and pick investors who provide seed money?
Well, that's not we haven't done that. So, fortunately, we were in a situation because of my prior real estate investments, I was able to use, the equity there to fund our startup there in the beginning. So we haven't sought investors at this point. It's something that we're considering down the line, but it's something that we wanted to should be profitable before we brought on investors. And we've gotten to that point here recently. So it's not something that we did early. I do know, and I don't know if this exactly addresses your question, but maybe it's just because of my attorney background. When it becomes, it's very, I would always recommend talking to an attorney because things get very difficult if you don't, dot the I's and cross the T's on seed money rounds, and you end up accidentally talking to unaccredited investors and not doing your due diligence on there. People do get in a lot of trouble. But as far as, finding the investors, I know they talked a lot about that at Yale and trying to set people up with some of those venture funds. And I just never really paid any attention to that. And that's a really long way of saying, I don't know.
With that, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude the episode. And just want to thank again, Rich and Garrett Ham tonight for the episode on entrepreneurship for operations managers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.